All right, so welcome to week four, day four. This is going to be Python review before the first assessment. Um, so we're going to work through this challenge for designing a library system. Essentially, we're going to have these will mostly deal with classes. So we'll definitely go through talking about inheritance, instance class and static methods. We can probably work in some getters and setters in here as well. Um, and as we can see, they've got let's see, like, yep, we're class methods, attributes, instance methods. That's definitely a getter method. Um, I could say this could kind of be a setter. So let's just start working through this like piece by piece. So let's start off with the simplest class that we're gonna need to add. Probably gonna want a book class. Uh, where do we start?
Are we doing a pseudo coding first, or trying to make that a habit, or we're just gonna go straight into it?
You guys tell me.
I guess we could try to, just because I try to build like a little battle rhythm. So just try to list out the outputs or the products that we need. So we'll need like a book class for sure.
So what I would say is let's do
Um,
this class by class.
okay, gotcha. Okay, so we start with the book class. Then of course the book class. We'll need two attributes, the parameters for title and author,
Okay.
and then a class method, so a function that's going to fall under the class called createBook, and then it says, oh, so I won't go to line 15, but it does say it's a parent class. So does that mean that that class will fall under parent class? Well, I guess we'll worry about that one later.
Don't worry about that one
Um,
after.
yep. All right, cool. So then
So is there
that's
anything we're
basically,
missing? Before we jump to pseudocode, is there something that we're forgetting to block into our book class here?
The init function.
The init function. Yes. So let's just write that out right now. And so I'm just going to put in title, author, and then we're just going to. So, so Brian, since you did say init function, um, I can just do, I can just do this, right? And we should be good.
You need to add the self attribute.
All right. And so let's put self in there. That look correct?
Does itself have to be
No,
first?
it's got to be self
Yes.
dot title, self dot author.
Perfect. All right. So, Logan, since you said we need to do the self dots, what does that do?
It refers to itself when it's creating an object from this class.
So, what do we mean by the self? Do we mean the instance of the class or the class itself?
The instance of the class.
Perfect. Yep. So remember, if I say something like my book is going to be book uh, Hello World by Logan. If I say my book dot title, or what I'm defining book or my book, when it's a self dot title, self, self, self references the instance. Self equals instance. All right, perfect. So we've got the init function down now. Um, hang on. What type of attributes are title and author?
those are class attributes.
Yeah.
Okay, why are they class attributes?
Well, because they fall under of book. We're creating this under that specific class.
I
So
think
there's
they're
going to apply. It's going to.
instance.
All instances can access those.
I think they're instance attributes.
Yeah, I think they're instance too.
Okay, so Venetia first and then Brian. Why do you guys think these are instance now?
Because they're attributes that are, I guess, describing the self itself.
It's yeah, also when you make a class of each thing, they're going to change. So like if you have book one, uh it's going to be different from another instance where you make a book two. So
Perfect.
if you make it a class instance, it's just it'll never change. It'll be the same thing for every single class that you make.
Perfect. Yep. So in general,
Gotcha.
your class attributes are always outside of the init. Meanwhile, your instance attributes defined in the init in general. So as Venetia and Brian said, title and author change for every class, for every instance of the class. You could have a different title for book one versus book two versus book three, etc. Versus if we had a class attribute that said something like, this is a book, and we'll make that equal to true, that's the same, regardless of if it's my book, if it's Venetia's book, or if it's no one's book, which is the same for all instances of a class. So your class attributes go outside of the init, your instance attributes go inside the init. All right, so great. So we've got our init done. Now we need to create the class method called createBook that creates a new book using given parameters and returns an instance of the book. All right, so let's break this down. The first part, this is a class method. So let me call on people who have not spoken yet. Tony, what's a class method?
I'm trying to pull up my notes from the class and instance methods. Overarching, what's the question that you're asking?
What is a class method? Like just in general.
Uh, I couldn't tell you.
Okay. Do you want to pick someone?
Uh, let's go, Mike.
Uh, I guess it's a method that you put under the class book.
Okay. But what makes that different from a normal method? Like, why are we calling this a class method?
Um, I couldn't really put it into words. I'm not sure how to
Okay.
explain it.
That's all right. Does anyone want to take it?
Yeah, is it because it's going to be referencing the init of class book and pulling its attributes from there. So that's why it's a class method.
So, class methods reference the entire class writ large versus
So
referencing a specific instance.
I kind of use the analogy of football, and I don't know if this is right. You could correct me. So the way I looked at it was, let's say that you have offensive plays and defensive plays, and we call those classes. And so, okay, it all the plays that I have that are under offense of how to execute that play, right? I have to create that play, that function, that method under offense for it to be considered offense. And then same thing with defense. Now, that means that my defense can't use my offense plays and my offense can't use my defense plays, my methods or my functions because they fall under that specific category. But there are special plays that both my offense and defense can use, so long as I keep those methods outside of that class, outside of that offensive and defensive play. So like if I have these two offense and defense, I've got offensive plays, different functions, methods, but I have a couple plays that both offense and defense could tap into that's outside of the class, right? A couple functions that they could both execute, whether you're offense or defense, and that would make it like global, I guess, is what I've been hearing. Is that a
So
correct
Jose,
analogy?
that was a great analogy, and that was 100% correct for inheritance. So what
Gotcha.
you were talking about is more for like parent-child relationships, which is a good thing that we're discussing it because that's the next thing that comes up. But that's kind of like what you were saying. If you have a parent class that's just called football plays, and then you have child classes that are called offensive plays and defensive plays, there will be some things in offensive plays that are not in defensive plays, and vice versa, right? But there are going to be some plays that are common to both that you find in that generic parent class.
Gotcha.
Isn't it kind of a good example of encapsulation too?
Yeah,
Because it's
that's true.
they're all together, but they're all separated. They all have different access to different things.
Yep.
Just so I mean it's that's kind of what it sounded like to me. He was describing encapsulation perfectly to me.
Yeah, I like the football play
Yeah, that
football
was
Yeah,
class
pretty
description, but that was good. But yeah,
yeah, that was
basically
a really good analogy.
it's like
I try. I
definitions
try.
like for a class like class book, class definitions or class methods can only be accessed if you're calling on the class book. Just like if you were calling on the class football, you can only access those stuff.
Perfect. That's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you, Venetia. So
yeah.
class methods can only be referenced when calling the class itself. I mean, or should be referenced or are referenced in relation to the class itself. If you'll remember, you can use a class, you can call a class method using an instance, but that's like you're calling the class method using the class. So in general, you can do either, but class methods go back to the class itself. All right, so let's define the method for create book. Mm, and it says using given parameters. Let's say new title and new author. Is this how I write a class method? Does anyone remember? Or am I missing a couple of things?
Need a decorator.
All right, so what decorator do I put?
Class method decorator.
Okay. What about inside the function? Is there anything I'm missing in here?
Yep, you need CLS because instead of self, you have to put CLS.
Perfect. Yep. So remember, self refers to the instance. CLS refers to the class itself. All right. Perfect. So where do I go from here? How do I create a new book and return an instance of the book? That sounds difficult.
We need to prompt for the title and the author.
Well, so one thing I would consider, don't build prompts into your classes. Build prompts into your functions, but don't build them into your classes. So, right, like for example, here we already have a function argument for the title and author, right? And the same thing in the init. What you could do now outside of your class is you could say something like, give, a user set name equals input, you know, uh, give me a username or a user. I guess we could do title, and then we could do another one here that's for user set name. We could say author name, and then we could say like my book is book user. So this is generally preferable to having the inputs baked into the functions themselves. Does that make sense? Also, it just makes it so much easier to test and use the functions and use the book class. For example, if you need to retest your code 20 different times as you're going through your code, do you really want to go through and type out a title and user every single time you're testing? It's so much easier to just say something like test book is book instead of going through the inputs and prompts every single time. Additionally, this also helps you to make your class a little bit more versatile. So, for example, let's say that you do need to hard code a book class every single time. Well, you can hard code it this way and allow for user input using the other method. So it's better to keep your class, to keep inputs and console stuff away from your classes for right now. Later on, we may get to some instances where you do want to do that. And in your assessment, you may or may not need to do that. But design your classes so that they can work without that input first, and then change it up later. All right. So,
I don't mean to stop you. Can you
no,
kind of can you re-summarize what you just said about the when you created the user set title and user set name input? I was following and then I kind of got lost there. What the purpose of doing that? You said to test your methods. Is that what you're saying?
so what I'm saying is don't do this when you are just like testing your code and writing your code. Do the stuff with input, like the console input, do that all the way at the end.
Got you. Okay. Okay, I see what you're saying. Got you. So like whenever I'm
So,
trying to test a function or whatever, do that at the very end.
so if when it comes to use to the input stuff, do the input
Okay.
stuff all the way at the end.
Gotcha. Okay.
Like
You
for
mean
example,
as I'm typing this out, put all that stuff at the end of your all of your functions, not while you're creating the functions or methods, or just in
it
general.
depends on it depends on the function, but like write your functions like we did here so that they don't have any user input things in there. Like
Gotcha.
title here is just something that you code in like we're doing here. That's not a
Okay.
user
Okay.
input direct. So do the user input stuff like later on.
Okay. Now I understand. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Does that make sense to everyone else as well? Okay, great. So let's get back to the class method for create book. So Venetia and Brian mentioned that class methods are different from instance methods, right? Because class methods are referenced in relation to the overall class. Instance methods are in relation to the specific instance. So we need to now be able to create a class or to create an instance of a class. Okay. How do I create an instance of a class? I'll give you a hint. We did it on line 26.
Yeah, pretty much. You do it like line 26.
Okay. So, in that case, let me copy paste line 26 in here. And we'll just do, I guess now we got to do new title. And then I guess now we got to do new author. Does that look about right?
Yeah. You
Okay.
And
should.
say return instead of test book.
All right. Perfect. Yep. That's one change. There's one other thing that we should change. So let's go back to CLS. What is CLS?
Class.
Class.
Well, what does it reference?
The book class.
Yeah, CLS references book. So why am I referencing saying book here? I should just be saying CLS.
Mm.
Ta-da! This functionally and this are similar, or that they operate in the exact same way, except they're two different things. For example, in we have two ways to create a new book now. The first way is we can call the init method, as we're doing here with test book, right? So we're referencing the book class, and then we're putting inputs in when we're putting inputs into the book class that references the init method. We can we can write another test book, and now we can reference the class method. So how do we reference the class method?
You just do a book dot, then the create book function.
Perfect. Both of these, this one and this one, do the exact same thing.
Mm.
They're both creating a new instance of the book class. One of them is doing it using the init method, which is different from the class method that we created to do this. Does that make sense? Any questions?
So if they do this practically the same thing, is there one that's more conventional to use?
It depends on your use case. Like, for example, what you might do in some instances or some cases is let's say that you know that let's say create book uh by C.S. Lewis. We're going to change the author so that the author is always going to be C.S. Lewis. So now your function for the class method is always going to create create books that are written by C.S. Lewis. So if we had test book Narnia,
Mm.
we get to create this by doing book Narnia by C.S. Lewis. Or the other way that we could write it, which would be better because we just wrote the custom function for this, is we would do create book C.S. Lewis and then say Narnia. Now that's an instance where, or a case, not to conflate language, a case where we could use where it might be preferable to use this class method, particularly if you know that you're going to be creating a lot of books that are written by C.S. Lewis, for example. No, it's useful for those kind of little carve-outs.
What's another use case? 'Cause
Um, Another use case for for class methods or for this way of creating things.
yeah, for using the class method. Because I think
Um,
class method is static.
we'll get some. Yeah, we'll get to a couple of them that as we go through the rest of the exercise.
Can you
Let's
widen your
see.
column a little bit? Because
Oh
it's
yeah, that is probably a good idea.
the way it's wrapping around is breaking my brain. I don't,
All right, how's
it's
that?
fighting me. Yes.
It's it's also in the India Slack channel too, if anyone wants to copy it and code along instead of hand typing the whole thing out.
It's in where? I'm sorry.
It's in the India Slack channel.
Oh,
Yep. All right, so let's see. Ken, we have to establish a variable like total books in the class, append to that list within the class. Let's see. So yeah, we could definitely do that. You could have a variable called total books that would be a class attribute, and then just modify it every time. So if you want to do total books, um, Well, we're gonna do basically do the equivalent of that with the get user count function in the next class that we're gonna design. So I would encourage you to hold off on that question for right now, because we're gonna get to that in the next few minutes. But yes, that is another benefit, or another type of class method that we can write. So speaking of, before we move on from book. Does anyone have questions about the class that we've created so far? Or does it all make sense?
Can you quickly, I'm a little lost on the at class method. Can you go over exactly what that's doing again?
Sure. So, as it says up here, when we say at class method, which is a decorator, as I think Brian mentioned earlier, that tells Python that the function that you've written is explicitly a class method instead of being a instance method. So when you're writing an instance method, we don't need any decorators, and we're referencing self. When you're writing a class method, you need to put at class method before it, and we need the first input to be CLS, which references the class itself. Does that
Okay.
help a little bit?
Yeah.
Awesome. Any other questions before we move on to library user? Okay, so let's shelve the book class for now. We can keep our test books here just because, and yep, let's start writing our library user class. All right, so let me hear from someone who I haven't heard from yet this morning. Thomas, where should we start with library user?
For library user,
Mhm.
see, we start by initializing with a
All right.
def in it.
And what do we want to pass to it?
See, we'll do like a name, maybe ID number.
Well, what do the instructions tell us that we need to pass to the class or to the init method?
A borrowed book.
Before that, so
Okay. Name and email.
name and email. Perfect. Yep. So let's just call it email because name sometimes is protected. So usually, like what I'll do is I'll say like user underscore name or username or something like that. But all right, great. So now we can go ahead and just do the exact same thing that we always do, right? We'll just say self dot username is username, self dot email is email. Okay, perfect. So that was the init function. Thanks, Thomas. Um, so now we can move on to the second part of it, which Thomas had mentioned. Who have I not? Let's see. Let me find somebody else to call on who I've not called on yet. Um, Adam. So this will be the first kind of pseudo coding of the morning. Um, what do we have to do for this instance method? Where do I even start?
Would you define a method called borrow book?
Okay, that is a good place to start. Let's call it borrow book. And then we'll just do pass it here.
It would probably be a Boolean, whether or not it's checked out, right?
Well, so what is the function trying to do?
User can only borrow only one book at a time. So you want to create an empty list, maybe, or define uh, like a borrowed book and then set it equal to 0 so it like counts. I
Okay.
don't know really. So I'm just
So
guessing.
let's think through this at a super high level first. So what is the function trying to do?
Uh, check out a book.
Okay, great. So let's write that down. So this function checks out a book for the user. Okay, so let's see. So it says the user can only borrow one book at a time. So that probably is going to factor into our calculations somewhere, right? So we should probably have something like, has the user already checked out a book? Because if they have, they can't check out another one. So we probably need to like throw an error or print something like to prevent them from checking out another book. But if the user has not checked out a book yet, um, well, if the user hasn't checked out a book, what do you guys think we should do?
Allow them to check it out.
Okay, how do we do that, Nicholas?
I mean, you have to write the method of being able to add it, but I would probably put it into a dictionary so that you can quickly reference the user that's checking out what book to determine if they have a book or not.
All right, great. So let's say stored the borrowed book as a variable, or as I guess it says here as an instant attribute. And then we should also probably like print out a confirmation message for the user. Okay, that's that looks like pseudocode to me. So let's get to actually coding this now. Now that we have a little blueprint. So the first thing, so also we can modify the class if we need to make this function happen. So
What about the number of books that can be borrowed? I think that would be a really good class variable.
so that is specified as one.
Is it? Oh, it is a class variable?
Well, it's specified like in the assignment
Oh,
prompt that the user can only borrow one book at a time.
okay.
So you do raise a good point though. Let's say that the first version of this assignment said the user can only borrow one book at a time. Later, another version can then say the user can borrow up to three books at a time. And your approach to one book versus a three or five or other number of book problem might be a little bit different. But for now, let's just assume that this is never going to change. It's always going to be one book, and that's it. All right. So Yi Lang mentions that we can have a self.hasBook equals Boolean. I actually really like that. So let's just, do we want to do that in the init method, in the function, as a class variable? Where do we want to put this piece of code?
Should be a net.
Okay. Let's put that in the init. And should probably just make it false, right? Because when a user is defined, like when you're just creating your library card, you don't have any books checked out yet. Perfect. Okay. So now, let's actually try to code the function itself.
I don't
So,
mean to interrupt you. Can
go
you
for it.
explain why that works? Because I'm still in my head, I'm still thinking the only thing you put in the init are your attributes, your instant attributes you're going to use later. Why or how does this Boolean actually work underneath the init?
Can I try to explain?
Glenn, do you want to take it?
Sure. So the
And it functions for the instance of a library user. So these are the properties that a given user would have when you instantiate them. So they're gonna have a username, they're gonna have email, and they're gonna have the property has book, which states whether they have a book or not. And since they don't have, it's gonna be a Boolean because you only need to check to see if they have a book or not, because they can only borrow one book. So if they have one or even more than one book, it's still gonna be true or false. I don't know if I explained that well,
Uh,
but that was the end of my explanation.
so you said when you instantiate, does that mean when you add another attribute or when you add a specific attribute to that instance that you want to put into the init? Is that what you mean
Yeah,
by
so let's say
instantiate?
that someone walks into the library, and that's when you would technically instantiate that user, like they're walking to the library, so now they've got a username and an
We got to
email.
put a label on them.
And what's that?
I say we got to label each person that walks into the library.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And
Okay.
then you have to let the, I don't know, the system know, the database know if this person has a book or not, like checked out.
Okay. So what we're saying
So
here is automatic or implicit. They all don't have a book checked out implicit until they tell us.
yeah.
Okay. And then when do we tell them when we create the instance? Because I don't see book attribute on this init function. So do we put a comma after email and then we add has book or whatever the case may be? That's
So,
the connection, the disconnection I'm having is okay. I have
so
the book
Logan
now.
asked the exact same thing in the chat, and Nicholas typed his reply a little faster than mine. What Nicholas said, which is exactly correct here, is it in this case we're basically hard coding the value of has book to be false.
Okay.
So
Okay,
it
gotcha.
doesn't. So the stuff that usually goes inside of the arguments to the init function are things that the user is going to pass in to the
Okay.
class when it's being initialized. So the user
Okay.
is passing in their name or passing in their email. We don't need the user to pass in if they have checked out a book or not, because we know every single time the user has not checked out a book when you're defining the user.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so it's kind of like a counter. We're kind of starting off with
Exactly.
nothing.
Yep.
Okay.
It's the
Okay.
exact it's the exact
So
same principle.
it doesn't matter if I walk into let's say the library with two books already checked out. At this point, we don't really care about that. We're just saying for this instance to set you up right. In order to allow you to check out a book, we're going to start you off with saying that you don't have any books.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
So
Okay. Thank you.
because if you already have two books checked out, you wouldn't be going through the library user, new user, right? Okay.
Exactly.
I
Yep.
don't
It's
know.
just like
What?
it's the way that the class is defined.
Gotcha. Okay.
And just to add, like instantiating, because I always have a problem with it, is like if we were just going into the library physically and we went in there and was like, my username is this, and unless they know how to handle it, they might be like, okay, I don't know what to do with that, you know. And so we instantiate it by username. So when somebody comes in and says, my username is this, they know how to handle it. Like there's a spot for it. And then if you're like, I want to check out a book, and if they don't have has book instantiated or activated, they'll be like, I don't know what you want me to do with that information. So there is a has book how to handle when you say, otherwise we're just people saying words to, to the front desk. They just need to know how to handle it. So
That's
disactivating
a good
it.
analogy. You got to train the front desk on what to do with that info that it's given. Okay.
And that's our
All right.
init right there.
That's right. The front desk is the init. Yeah, I like that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, two analogies in the span of less than an hour. This is going to be a really
This
active
is
review, I can tell.
this is huge, huge.
But on a more general note, though, analogies are genuinely one of the most helpful things I've found when trying to learn coding, especially when you're dealing with things that are not normal. Like, when do we talk about instantiation and class methods in like everyday life? You don't. So it makes it harder to understand how it works. So if you got like outside of class or in general, if you guys have an analogy that works for you, feel free to like send that to other people because a lot of times that'll help them out too. So I love the fact that you all are doing this already. That's great. Okay, so let's now move on to the borrow book function. So um let me pick on somebody else. Or choose somebody else, correction. Danny, do you want to walk us through how we might code this function now that we've got the pseudocode and now that we have has book?
Yeah, we need to put what do we need to put has book in the function?
That's a good question. I'll ask the class. I'll ask you or your classmates. Do we need to put has book or what do we need as the inputs to this function?
Wouldn't it be the same attributes as the class?
Can you repeat that
Uh,
question again?
so what are the inputs that we need to put into the function?
For borrow book?
Yes.
Okay.
So what goes inside the parentheses? That's all we're trying to figure out.
Oh, this is the book they want to check out. Yeah, so
Well, comma book.
Okay, yep. So we're gonna need to put in a book. What else might we need to put in here?
Do we need like the title and the author?
Nope. So all of that should be in the book because we'll just input a book class into there or a book, an instance of the book class.
Uh,
So I'm seeing it in the chat. We are going to need self
yep.
as you have one other parameter. So, Danny, hopefully that answers your question earlier for how we can get has book in there.
Got it.
All right. So do you wanna keep coding?
Sure. Uh, so we have those params in there. So we need to write a if statement to see if
Okay.
so if user has book, I think.
Okay. So how would we how would we write that out? Because we don't have a user in here. 'Cause you are right. We're going to need to have something dot has book. But what goes into something?
Library user.
We can't do library user, but we can put self in because self will reference the instance of library user that's in question. So remember, because this is going to be, let's just write this down. This is an instance method. So instance methods use self. Okay, so we've got the if self.has book. So where do we go from here?
Well, if you have the book, you can't. If you already have a book, you can't check it out because you can only have one at a time.
All right, yep, that's true. So in that case, let's just say you already have one book checked out. Can't check out anymore. All right.
You go
What
over the
next?
shorthand.
Sorry, say again.
Did you go over the shorthand on line 41?
Sure. So Well, what do you mean by the shorthand, I guess?
Um, so you're saying if stuff.book is equal true, but I don't know if everyone knows that shorthand rather than
Oh, good
saying
point.
equals true. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So,
Oh, okay.
mhm. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
No, I'm just saying, I'm just thinking out loud. Sorry.
Oh,
I'm
all
just
good.
saying I have a light bulb. Because I mean I
So,
like wait, it's logical. It's yeah. So go ahead. I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. So, yeah, Lang brings up a really good point. So what type of variable is hasbook? Hasbook is a Boolean, right? It's either true or it's false. So ordinarily what we do, right, is we'd say if self.hasbook is equal to true or not, right? But we know that this is either true or false. And the overall input to a Boolean or to an if statement has to be either true or false. So we don't need the equals true because hasbook is either true or false. So we're able to use this kind of shorthand in order to make that work. This only works because hasbook is either true or false, because it's a Boolean by definition. All right.
Uh,
So this is what happens if. Oh, Francis, go ahead.
yes. Do we need the parentheses on self-isolate, or it's not needed?
We don't need it in this case. We can take that out because it's short enough. It's kind of like if variable. So we don't need it. You personally will like to put parentheses around my if statements. It just for syntactic purposes, but you don't need it if you want to have a little slightly cleaner code. And Joshua, yes, it's because of line 29. That's exactly correct. Okay, so that's the if part of things. After an if, you generally need an else. So that's assuming that the user has not checked out a book yet. So now we need to store the borrowed book as an instance attribute. Okay. Do we have an instance attribute somewhere that we can store the book in?
Hasbook.
Well, hasbook is the Boolean talking about whether we have a book or not.
Oh,
So that's a good point, though. We should probably change that
yeah. The
to
name
be
probably.
true. Um, so updates user to have checked out a book, but we still need to store the book that we've checked out somewhere. So how do I do that?
I would create a different method and call that method and make it a
Oh,
class or a class variable.
okay. So
Wouldn't you?
oh, go ahead. Mhm.
Oh no, I was just say, can't you just create an empty dictionary right now and then just start adding to the dictionary?
So why would we need so all right, let's back up. So the first thing is we're going to need a new variable. Both of you guys are correct on that. We need a new thing to store this thing in because we can't store it in the user's name, we can't store it in the email, and we can't store it in a Boolean. We're going to need a something. The first question, what type of variable is the book that the user has checked out? Is that an instance attribute or instance variable, or is that a class attribute?
Wouldn't the books
That's
be a class attribute?
Okay, why would it be a class attribute?
Because every user can access them?
Well, can every user check out the same book?
No, but the list of books would be available to them, available books anyway.
But we're not doing a list of books. We're just doing one book. So if we're just doing one book, where that one book is for each user, would that be a class variable or an instance, or class attribute or an instance attribute?
I have to look at the book class again. I always forget about what's on the day. So right now, the book is labeled as a class attribute under book. So title
Well, forget
authors.
about the book class. Forget about the book class.
Okay, gotcha.
We're just looking at library user.
Library.
So as I think Joshua put it in chat, but because the book that we are setting is for each user, it's for the book that's being checked out is set for each instance of the class. So because of that, the book that we've checked out would be an instance variable. So that's where we would have a variable that's kind of like borrowed book, but we need to put it with a dot self, just like we did for hasbook.
So
Does
what's the
that make
difference
sense to
between
everyone?
has book and borrowed book?
Sorry, say that one more time, Scott.
What's the difference between has book and borrowed book? Because if has book is false, borrowed book would also be false, right?
Well, that's up to you guys. How do we want to define borrowed book at initialization?
Empty dictionary.
Okay, so we could do a dictionary, but we don't necessarily need to store it as a dictionary, right? What if there, have you guys seen the none type before? We could just use that.
Yeah.
None type is a great placeholder because the value is quite literally like non-existent when you use that. So like the defaults vary or defaults for blank things. So default, I'm just gonna make this in here. Actually we'll do that up here. So this is just good knowledge to have. So default blanks. So for an integer, for a number, usually you'll use 0. For a string, you'll just use a blank string. For a Boolean, it's either going to be true or false, depending on what you use. For a list type, you'll just do an empty list. For a dictionary, you'll just do an empty dictionary. And then for anything else, in general, you'll just do none. It's just kind of like a placeholder there that it sets for that variable. Yeah, so it's as Venetia said, it's a placeholder. It doesn't have a type. It's just none. It's just like it's like a spacer. All right. So we have that borrowed book variable. That's an instance attribute is set now. So now we can go back to our else statement, and now we can say self. Well, so we set that it has checked out a book. Now we've set that to true. So now we can also update our borrowed book. So let's update borrowed book to be equal to the book that we input into the function. And then now we can print out. So let's say that I wanted to print out let's say I wanted to do a nice little F string. And I wanted to say, congratulations, you have checked out book title. So I need a way to get the title of the borrowed book. How can I get that? I'll give you a hint. The book is going to be some instance of the book class. So how do I access the title of the book of a instance of book?
List.
I don't think we need a list. Not a superinit. Let's go all the way back to those examples that we did at the start. Test book is let's do this Narnia test book, right? So I'm setting the title of this test book to be Narnia. How do I access the title of this book?
Would you just want to print out test book Narnia?
Well, we want to access the type. So printing it out is not going to give us the type. That'll give us a generic class object. How do we print out the type? Or just access the type?
Type parentheses test book.
Well, that will give us the class. I'm just looking to get the title out from this.
Oh, I thought you said type. Sorry.
Nope, all good. Well, since do you have any ideas for how we can get the title, Logan?
Print test book dot title.
Perfect. Yeah. Or in this case, if we want to do it for, so if we do test book, which again is that first instance, dot, and then we can see the, well, forget half of this, but you can see the author and we can see the title. Remember, this is just accessing an instance attribute. There's nothing more to it than that. The way we access an instance attribute is by doing the name of the instance, dot, and then the attribute. So we're going to do the exact same thing that we just did here on line 76. We can do that up here in borrow book. So as a matter of fact, let's just copy paste this. I'll take it out from there. Put it in.
I have a question about
Yes.
good practice. Would you, in most places I've been, we don't necessarily access the attributes directly. So is it best practice to use setters and getters instead of accessing properties directly, attributes?
It depends.
Is that still the case?
Yeah, what I will say is it really depends. If you're, for purposes of doing things really simply, accessing the attributes directly is okay. When you, like for your assessments, for example, unless it explicitly tells you to use a getter or setter method, don't make life complicated for yourself and just access it directly. There will be cases later, or potentially on your assessment, which I have not seen yet, where you will be asked to use a getter or setter method to do something.
Mhm.
That's generally when I say to do it for the purposes of right now. Otherwise, just access it nice and simple.
Okay. I just got muscle memory for using setters and getters, that's all.
I mean, if you know how to do that and you prefer doing it, that's totally fine. For anyone who feels uncomfortable with getters and setters, just feel free to do this normally, and it's totally okay.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to know about that in Python because I know in other languages you do it, but in Python I wasn't too sure if that was a standard practice.
Gotcha. No, that is a good question. All right. So we're almost done with the borrow book. So instead of saying test book dot title, we already have a book in here. So we can honestly just say book dot title. And that will get us the title of whatever book the user that we defined has checked out. And that's it. That's our borrow book function. So, well, again, we already worked out the pseudocode beforehand, so we don't need to walk through the pseudocode, but let's just make sure our code itself matches up to what we defined or what we said that we wanted to write. So if self.hasBook, that checks if we've checked out a book. If they have, we're just going to print this little error. If else, so that means hasBook is false, then we're going to store the borrowed book as an instance attribute, which we're doing in here. And then just for the print statement, we're getting the title of the book that we input, and then we're saying that we checked out the book with that type. All right. So I know we did a bunch of bouncing back and forth when writing this method, but does the overall process that we use to create this method make sense? Are there any questions about this? Okay, Do we want to take a break now, or do we want to do the last method in the class and then take a break? I'm good either way, so it's up to you all.
I'm good either way too.
Let's take a break.
Yeah, I gotta run off to the restroom anyway.
All
All
right.
right, so let's take 10 and then we'll come back to it. If anyone has questions, feel free to ask. I'll be around during break. All right, so this will be part two of the review for Python. It's mostly really focused on classes. So in the first half of the review, as y'all remember, we went through we're going through this kind of problem set for designing a library system. So the first thing that we did is we created this book class that we defined earlier, right? So we talked about init methods, which are a instance method, and because it's an instance method, which is going to reference self, which references the instance of the class. But we also talked about class methods very briefly, where we talked about making the create book class method. And we know this is a class method because number one, it has at class method before it. It has CLS in the parameters. And CLS references back to the class itself, while self references the instance of the class itself. So with that example out of the way, we talked a little bit about defaults and like some things that people use as blanks or like placeholder values. These are just a couple of options that you can choose from depending on what your data type looks like. And then we moved on to working through the library user class. So we started off with a very simple init method, or init function, but then later on, as we started working through some of our methods, we realized that we needed to add in more instance attributes like has book and borrowed book. And those instance attributes, we can add those in and hard code them so that the user isn't writing those in when they're initializing their user, but that those values get set automatically in the backend. And then we then did a little bit of pseudocoding for this borrow book instance method, right? So that's why it's referencing self. And we talked a little bit about, doing like self.hasBook and for referencing those instance attributes and setting those instance attributes in here. And then also referencing those attributes for book. So that's just a little overview of everything that we did before the break. So are there any questions about any of this before we move on to the next part of library user? Okay, so if not, let's just go through and check that everything works for now. Um, so, Jose, did you have a question?
No, I was gonna say I was mute. I didn't realize.
No worries.
But I think I'll wait till you go through and just see how it plays out. Maybe I won't have the question no more.
You can ask the question. That's it's up to you though.
Oh, okay. So I'm following up until book underscore title under the if else
Yeah.
method. And so with that one, I see that I guess if we look under library user, we got self dot underscore borrow book,
Mhm.
and it says none. But then, and I know you've already addressed this earlier, but above that we have the Boolean doesn't have book. How is that attribute? How is that working out as far as, or are we adding to a list to borrow book, or how is
Yeah,
that
that's a
helping us? Oh no, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So all we're doing is we're just setting a default value. That's all we're doing. So this just sets the initial value for borrowed book. And it's the exact same thing here. It just sets the default initial value for has book. Right? So think about this as kind of like let's do like an example up here. I say something like, "Do I like ice cream?" is true. Write more code in the middle, and then I'm gonna like define some function, no ice cream, and then do I like ice cream is false. This is the exact same principle as we're doing with library user. So here, right, we're defining this Boolean to be true at the start. And then if I run this function later, then the value of this will change to false. If I don't run this function, then the value of this just stays true.
Okay.
So
Okay, gotcha.
that's the exact same thing like we're doing here. We're just setting it to false initially, right? And then if we run the borrow book function, then it'll change it to true.
Okay.
Don't you have to declare variables anyway? Because I think maybe that's where he's getting kind of confused because before you use any variable, you have to declare it. You can't
Yeah.
you just can't just put it in there randomly. So
Yes.
if you
Yep.
know
So you always have to declare it before you use it, just in general.
so maybe that'll help
Okay.
him understand.
And speaking of, Venetia actually raises a good point. We should probably walk through the code that we've set up so far. So let's take a couple minutes to do that as well, and feel free to interrupt and ask any questions as we're going through. So again, as mentioned, we started off with the book class. We don't have any class attributes, but we do have two instance attributes, right? We've got title and author, which we set up in our init function. So we set up title and author. Then we define the class method to create a book called by C.S. Lewis. So every time you run the create book C.S. Lewis function, it's always going to create a new book with some title that is always written by C.S. Lewis. So let me move the examples up a little bit, actually. That'll help. Where are we? Yeah, right here. So there's two ways now to define a new book, right? So we have the first one where you're just running the init function with the name and let's make this test author. But then the other way is we can run this create book C.S. Lewis thing that then automatically sets the author to C.S. Lewis. So that was the first class that we wrote for book. The second class that we wrote, and after we did this example, which I'll delete that for now, is the library user class, right? So we set that it has these two attributes for name and email, which we set in here. And then when we were writing that instance method for borrowing a book, which is this one, we figured out that we needed a way to check if the user has checked out a book. Since we didn't have that method, a way to do that before. So that's how we added in cell has book, which, as we just discussed, we set to false, right? Because when you create your library card, you probably haven't checked anything out yet. And then we wrote in our function, and then we switch. Once the user does check out a book, then we have to change this to true, right? And we have that checked out, that right here. And we're also we also need a way to track what book the user has checked out. So in this case, we have borrowed book as the thing that tracks the book that the user has checked out. And then here we can just set that to book. And then the last thing, this is just a little bit down here where I wanted to have like a custom congratulations message. So instead of just saying you have checked out a book, like generically, I wanted to be able to tell the user like this title of the book that they checked out. So in order to do that, we're just referencing the title of that book or storing it in this variable called book title, and then we're just printing it out in an F string. So that's the point where we're at now. So just to see this in action, um, let me create a new user and have us excuse me, and have us check out test book. So let's say user Danny is going to be a new library user. This is going to be Danny, and then your email is going to be danny@dan.com. So you are now you're a new user. So congratulations, Danny. Um, let's say that Danny wants to check out, what did I call the book earlier? Danny wants to check out test book. So based on what I wrote, how can Danny check out test book?
Would you call the borrow book function passing the user Danny and the test book as the params?
Yes, that's correct, Logan. Yep. So we'll start off because again, remember that borrow book is a instance method of library user, which is Danny. So we're going to say user Danny dot borrow book, which is the function, and then we're going to input a book. And in that case, the book we're going to input is test book, which is again that book that we defined up here. So what should happen when we run this code? Well, a couple of things, right? The first thing that should happen is that Danny should now have checked out a book. So has book should be true. His borrowed book should now be that test book. And then it should print out this congratulations message with the title of test book, which is test. So let's go ahead and make sure that this actually works before we proceed, because if it doesn't, we're going to need to change something in our code. Okay, so it tells us, congratulations, you have checked out test, which we're saying is the book title, which is the book title. So it looks like our code worked. Any questions about how we got to this point before we keep moving forward with library user? Things making sense so far?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean I'm just sometimes the class methods they're kind of wonky to me. But I mean I've used them before. Uh so I think I mean one of the things I was thinking about could be a really good use case is for using class methods and class variables is like if you're making a video game and you're you're defining all the elements of the game, like the player, the enemy, and all of that. But then you would use uh, you would use class methods and class variables to manage the game state.
Mhm.
So like if you like keeping track of the score or managing how players move, how managing how like the AI for the enemies or how they move, all of that stuff. So it will
Yeah.
there'll be like the global variables or the state manager that manages how things happen in the game.
Yeah, that's a great way of thinking about it.
Okay.
And yeah, your class variables are things that like they don't change across all instances of the class.
Right.
So an example of this, like to go to the video game analogy, might be like, let's say that you have um like one of the types of characters in your game is like a dragon,
Mhm.
right? So you're gonna create like a class called dragon. Now all dragons can fly. If it
Mhm.
can't fly, well, there might be some that can, but let's assume all dragons can fly. You could probably have a class attribute
Mhm.
called like can fly instead of true. That way it's true for every single dragon that you create under that class.
Okay.
You could also add in a class variable to count the number of dragons that you have, which is what we're going to do very shortly with get user count here.
Because
So
that's what I was
speaking
thinking.
of,
Go
oh,
ahead.
good.
I was just thinking like that's why I was thinking like and when we started this, like the number of books that can be borrowed maximum, it'd be a good class variable because you can it manages the state of the library because so at that particular library you can manage the like one particular library you can only check out 2 books or another one you can check out 10, something like
Yep.
that.
Yeah. So that we could definitely, or you could change it for different user classes as well, like for a member versus a normal user or something like that.
So it's kind of like
And that,
kind of like universal rules
yeah, yeah,
for
kind of like that. That's a good
yeah,
analogy.
yeah. Okay, I just wanted to clear it up in my mind. So
That was a good question. So thank you for asking that, and hopefully that helps everyone else out a little bit as well. All right, so let's move on to the last thing in library user. Um, so here, let's see if we can shrink down some of this. Actually, let's just move some of this around. Um, and we now need to define this class method called getUserCount that returns the total number of users in the system. All right, so let's go through the whole process again. How do I define a class method?
At class method.
All right, so add class method, that's the first part. Then let's just define our getUserCount. Do I need to put in anything inside the parentheses, Michael?
Um, no. Or maybe the username.
Well, so in this case,
Don't you have to put
uh,
CLS?
Oh yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
so we don't, yep, so whenever you have a class method, you always have to put CLS. Just like whenever you have an instance method, you always have to put self. It's like two things. Class method, CLS. Class method, CLS. Instance method, self. So other than that, though, you're right. We don't need to put in anything else. Because the nice thing about the instructions here is that the instructions don't say that you need to put anything in the parentheses. So we're good to go. All right. So let's put a pass in here and let's figure out how we're going to code this thing. So we need to get the total number of users in the system. Let me just say so we know this is a class method. Return total number of users in the system. Do we have a way to track the total number of users in here? Let's see what we have in our variables. I don't I don't think so. So now we need to figure out how the heck to track the total number of users in the system. This is pretty similar to what a lot of folks suggested earlier in chat about how to track all of the library books that are in the system. It's the exact same principle. So what we'll need to do, and we're going to need a variable to store the number of users in the system. So first question for everyone. So I'm just going to write the pseudocode up here. So define the number of users in the system. What type of variable would this be? Is that going to be a class attribute or an instance attribute? Tony, any ideas?
I'm sorry. So the define the number of users in the system, would it be a class or an instance? Is that what you're asking?
Yep.
My guess is class, but I'm really confused still on the like class and instance definitions.
Okay.
So
Your guess would be correct. And Kent said the same thing in chat. Both of you guys are correct. This would be a class attribute. The reason for this is, so I think last week, I think I put a flow chart or something in the chat. I would say like following that may be helpful, but whenever we're dealing with a class or an instance attribute, just remember, class attributes are the same for every single instance. Does the number of users change depending on if I'm Tony or if I'm Michael or if I'm me? It should. So because of that, it's going to be a class attribute. However, my name is going to change if I'm Tony, if I'm Michael, or if I'm me. So that's going to be an instance attribute. In the same way, if I have a book, Tony might not have one, or Michael might have one. So that's why that would be an instance attribute. So like coming up with like mini examples for yourself, kind of like the analogies, like the football ones we were using earlier, can be helpful with that. But again, to backtrack to the macro picture, the number of users does not change depending on which user I am. So because of that, that'll be a class attribute. Does that help clarify things a little bit? Okay.
Yes, thank
Awesome.
you.
Yeah, no problem. So let's just, define a placeholder, define this. So all our class variables generally go before the init statement, right? So let's say number of users. What should this be at the start?
0.
0.
0. Because we don't have any users at the start. There's no one here. So, all right, that's great. And then now this should be relatively easy for us to retrieve the number of users in the system, right? So what we just need to do instead of pass is we'll just say return number of users. Hang on. I just defined it up here, but it's giving me a weird squiggly line and saying it's not defined. What's the one thing that we have to add to the start in order to get the store?
CLS dot.
Perfect. Yep. Remember, this is a class method. Whenever we're dealing with a class method, you always need to use CLS dot to access the class attribute. All right, perfect. So there's one little problem with this function. If we look at where do we use number of users, we define the number of users at the start. Okay, that's awesome. And we return the number of users. Do we ever change the number of users?
No.
If we don't change it, that means we're always going to be returning 0. That's a problem because even if we create new users, we don't have a way to update number of users. So what we need to do is we need to essentially come up with a way to, whenever we create a new user, we need to update number of users. Or we need to, number of users, I guess we could say even plus equals 1. Or plus plus. So we know the code we need to write. Where do we put this? Any ideas? So where do we create new users in the code?
Wouldn't it be after you define the user, after like they've collected all the username and email information, or?
Yep. And as I think you're alluding to, and Uline said, we got to do that somewhere in the init statement. So let's do it maybe after we set all the instance variables. So let's move this thing up into here. Okay. So we know where we need to write the code now. So that's a good start. So how do I update the number of users? Because the one thing that I know I can't do is I can't say number of users plus equals 1. Or I really shouldn't do that.
You can't,
So
right? Because you'll be doing that in an instance, not on the class level.
right. So how do we do this at the class level? Because you're right. Right now we're doing this at the instance level, which is not correct.
That's a good question.
Anyone have ideas?
You can every time you create a user, append to a list of users and then return the sum of
Well, we don't need a list of users here though, right? We have the number of users already. So we just need to add one to that. The only problem is, as Brian was alluding to, is that right now the way we've written it just references the instance for it.
Can you make a reference to a class in the init?
Yes. So this is, I think, what Kent, Yilang, and Joshua are alluding to in the chat. So what we can do really simply is we can remember, so this is a class variable. And we want to modify number of users for all instances of the class. So when we're referencing this, normally what we would do is, because this is an instance method, it would say self.number of users, right? But self references the instance.
Mhm.
And this isn't a class method. So if I say cls.number of users, it's going to break because there's no CLS because it's not a class method.
Right.
Instead, what we have to do is remember CLS references the class itself, right? Which is library user. So copy, paste that, and we say library user dot number of users plus equals 1.
Okay.
So again, as what that does is this changes number of users for the entire class. It changes it at the class level. So for those of you who put that in the chat, that's completely correct. Great job. But don't just take my word for it. Let's actually check that this thing works. So we created our user Danny. Danny has now borrowed a book. So if we have user Danny, number of users should start at 0. We made Danny exist. So now number of users should now be 1. Right? So let's double check that that works. So we'll print out user Danny, or I guess we should do library user dot get user count. And then let's create another user just for kicks. Let's say user Tony, going to be a new library user. This will be Tony at Tony. Don't know if Tony's a valid email address, but that's okay. And then we're going to do the exact same thing. So now that we've created a second user for Tony, the total number of users should be 2. Now let's make sure that this works. If it doesn't, then we might have some changes to make. Okay, that's pretty cool. So it looks like we are able to update that class variable at the class level. So that's it for the library user class. Any questions about that? Does that make sense? Are things starting to click in a little bit more with class versus instance stuff? Okay.
Can I see
So
the, sorry, can I see
No,
the
yeah.
create, can I see the create book class method real quick?
Sure.
I
And
I
I'll
was
post
following along and I screwed up a little bit.
all good. Here, I'll
Okay,
post all of this in the Slack channel right now, actually. So that way we
cool.
can have a track record of that. And I'll update it when we do the last class here as well. All right. Oh boy. Okay, so we have a how many more classes are there? 2. All right, let's do one more class for now, and then we'll just do general questions before the assessment. Or I can give you guys a practice to do in groups. We'll figure that out. But I know that one of the things that we do want to talk about was inheritance. So let's talk about that. So I now need to make a member class that inherits from library user. So let's define a new class. Let's see that let's just do that down here. So I'm going to make a class member, how do I make a class inherit from another class?
Put the parent class inside of your parentheses.
All right, perfect. User. Okay. Um, so this is all pretty much the same as the default library user, actually. Yeah, I can only borrow one book at a time. So never mind that. So let's forget about this example because that's kind of boring. And let's do the librarian one. It's a little bit more complicated, but I think that'll be helpful. So yeah, it's the exact same thing, right? So it's going to inherit from library user. Um, do I need to do anything with the init method in here?
You have to use a super in it because you're using the parent class, I think.
Perfect. Okay, so Um, as you said, the super init is used when you have a parent-child relationship and the child is inheriting the super stuff from the parent. So what's the syntax for doing a super init, if you can just remind us?
I think it's def in it and then super in it under it. Yeah.
Perfect. So also again, this is where the autocomplete comes in handy. Like if you're just typing it out and then it already recognizes what the correct inputs are because they're in library user. So you can just hit that, and then that'll automatically give you the super dot in it. So the super, again, just to be very explicit about it, super references the parent class, right? So this essentially says, hey, run the library user dot init function. Basically, it's not identical, but that's basically what it's telling you to do. If we had librarian initiate reading from book, we would have view the init function from book. So that's all the super does. Is it says take stuff from the parent and that's it. Okay. Um, and then the last thing that we are asked to do here is create a library and add books to a library. So let's write a function somewhere that says like add book to library. And we'll put in a book there and we'll do a pass. So I think a few folks were talking about this earlier, but if we are going to have a library, right, that's going to be a collection of multiple books, what data type do we want to use to store multiple books?
A list.
A list, yeah. It's the easiest option. We could do a dictionary as well, but doing a list is just nice and simple. So we're gonna want to have let's say a list of books is gonna be, I think Kent said in the chat, it'll be a blank list. So all right, so you guys are suggesting we have a list of dictionaries. That could work, and that's not incorrect. That's actually a good idea. However, in this case, we don't need to use a dictionary to store the book. The reason for that is because we have an entire class that has titles and authors in it. So instead of deconstructing each book into a title and author, creating a dictionary with the title and author, and creating a list of those dictionaries, the other option that we could do is we could just scroll too far. We could just store a list of book class objects, which effectively has the same function. So this is again where classes really come in handy is they help you make slightly less complicated data structures in that way. So so the class in this case kind of replaces a dictionary, which makes things a little bit simpler. All right. So let's real quick write this add book to library function. So, or before we do that, first question, list of books. Is this going to be a class attribute or an instance attribute? What do we think?
I think it's going to be
It'd be a
class.
class.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it doesn't
So let's
change. Like, I mean, you every user that you create is not going to have a different library.
right.
So,
Yep. I mean that'd be pretty annoying. Um,
you know,
so yeah, so let's make it a class attribute so that if Brian's a librarian and Michael's a librarian and they're both adding books, they're both adding it to the same library. Nice and easy. Okay, that's perfect. Um, so we've got our class attributes written up here, and let's just make it explicit. This is a class attribute. So so now let's look at that add book to library function. So what type of function is add book to library? Is this going to be a class method or an instance method?
Class.
It almost, I was going to say instance because it doesn't really need to pull anything from the class. It just needs to
So,
add itself to the class.
so let's backstep a little bit there. Um, if so, who adds a book to the library? Is an individual librarian adding the book, or is the librarian class adding the book?
The individual librarian.
Yep. So when you're thinking about like doing things as individuals, um, individual equals instance attribute. So we'll add a self. Class, if you're thinking again, individual is instance. If it's something that is like the librarian class does this, then that makes it a class method. So you can think about the add book to library function, um, kind of like borrow book, right? Where it's like an individual user is doing this. Same thing for, oops, scrolled too far again, for a librarian. Okay, so we need to add a book to the list of books. So let me take a look at the chat. So if book and list of books. So in this case, let's assume that the book is not in list of books. That is a good check though. But let's just assume that it's not. So we're always going to append the book to the list of books. So you're correct. So we'd want to do list of books dot append book. The only problem though is we get this squiggly line again saying that list of books is not defined. So we need to put in something before list of books. Now remembering what we just did before, right, in our library user class. Definite is an instance method, but we're trying to access a class attribute. So when we did that last time to access a class attribute within an instance method, we used the name of the class. So we're going to do the exact same thing down here. So as Kent put, we're going to say librarian.listofbooks.append. As we can't say CLS here because this is a instance method. Since we don't have CLS, we have to use the name of the class. And we're not going to do the bonus because I think that's going to fry everyone's brains even more. So, with the 2-hour marathon for the review complete, let me go ahead and pop this code into the oh boy, into the Slack channel. That's not what I want to do. And then while I'm doing that, what questions do we all have about this, if any? Are things making sense? Are things still extremely confusing? Do you guys want to do another example as a class or work through an example in groups?
In the add book to library function on line 99, do we have to do self.book equals book, or why don't we have to?
That's a great question. So in this case, book is just it's just a pass, an argument to the function, add book to library. So that's all we're saying here is that the function argument is getting passed in to another function as an argument. So it's not like we're doing like self.username or anything that's like that's getting passed through. Any other questions on this example?